Rewriting the story now. Cereal boxes at 2:51 in the morning don't ask for you by name. I was in aisle 7 of a real Canadian superstore in Airdrie, Alberta, running a price gun that kept jamming, wearing a blue vest 2 sizes too large, smelled like the industrial stripper they use on the linoleum. When the night manager's voice came over the radio, there was a man at the entrance asking for me. Not the new overnight guy, not by employee number. By name. Says he needs to speak with Ryan Gallacher, Tanya said. Older gentleman, just standing there. Nobody comes looking for a shelf stalker at 3 in the morning. I set the price gun down and walked toward the front. He was just inside the automatic doors, mid-70s, wool coat, no hat, white hair swept back from a face that had turned decades of weather and hard decisions into something closer to granite than to age. He had the patient, measured look of a man who has waited in a lot of rooms for things that mattered. He saw me before I saw him properly, and then he stopped moving entirely, looking at my face the way you look at something you recognize from long ago and never expected to find here, in this place, in this light. "You're Douglas Gallacher's son," he said, not a question. Nobody had said my father's name to me in 29 years, not anyone who'd actually known him. Douglas Gallacher died in the winter of 1996 on the highway between Fort McMurray and Edmonton when a transport truck lost its grip on black ice and crossed into oncoming traffic. He was 39, I was 13, my sister Bryn was 10. Our mother spent the next year barely speaking, working 2 jobs, keeping the house in Leduc standing, and folding my father into the category of things too painful to look at direct. He became a photograph above the television, a name we didn't say out loud because saying it out loud made the absence louder. And now an old man was standing in a superstore at 3 in the morning, saying it like he'd had lunch with him last week. "I'm his son," I said, "Ryan." "I know who you are, you look exactly like him." He shook my hand, firm, deliberate, a handshake that meant what it did. "Walter Drummond, your father and I were business partners." I stood there in my blue vest, 42 years old, price gun still clipped to my belt, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and tried to process the word partners. "My father worked in oilfield services," I said. "He was a land technician." He was, and in 1991 he and I and a third man, Claude Bernier, formed a land partnership. We pooled our money to acquire subsurface mineral rights on 3 parcels northeast of Conklin. He looked at me steadily. "I've been trying to find you for 14 months. "How did you find me here?" "A private investigator. She tracked your employment record." He paused. "I'm sorry it took this long. I started looking after Claude passed last year, and it occurred to me I wasn't going to live forever either." I had 3 pallets of cereal left to scan, a radio on my belt, shift ending at 6, and a drive home to a basement suite in Crossfield I shared with a border collie named Herschel, and the wreckage of a life that had come apart 18 months ago. "Mr. Drummond, I have a shift." "I know, I'll wait." He looked around the store. "Do you have a break room?" We sat at a plastic table under humming light. Walter opened a leather satchel and set down 1 folder, then a second, then a third, the way a man sets down something heavy he's carried a long time and is finally allowed to put on a table. The Gallacher Drummond Bernier Land Trust was registered in 1991. 3 equal partners, 1/3 each. We acquired 4,200 acres of subsurface mineral rights in the Cold Lake region, northeast of Conklin, paid $180,000 total, $60,000 each. It was cheap because nobody wanted it. The surface was useless, the subsurface geology was uncertain. Your father believed in it anyway. He turned the first folder toward me. The original registration dated March 14, 1991. 3 signatures. 2 I didn't know. The third I recognized instantly, even after 30 years, forward-leaning, confident, with a particular loop on the G I'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter. Douglas R. Gallacher. "When your father died," Walter said, "his share passed to his estate. Your mother, Margaret, became the beneficiary. She was notified. I sent the letter myself in 1997. She wrote back, said the land was worthless and she didn't want to think about it. I believe she was grieving, and the letter came from a world your father had occupied that she wasn't part of. She wrote, I kept it, so I'm quoting, Douglas always believed in things that took longer than expected to become real. Maybe he'll still be right." I looked at the folder. "She died in 2019, I said. "I know, and the share passed to you and your sister equally. I've been trying to reach you since Claude died last year because I realized the trust needed settling properly while I was still around to do it." "What happened to the land, Mr. Drummond?" He opened the second folder. In 2007, the Cold Lake region drew serious oil sands development interest. By 2009, 2 energy companies were negotiating subsurface access for the parcels near Conklin. In 2014, one signed a long-term extraction agreement on 2 of the 3. In 2019, the third was folded into a secondary agreement. The trust had been earning royalty income since 2014. He turned to the last page, a current assessment, 8 weeks old, total trust value, land and accumulated royalties combined, $87 million. My third split evenly with Bryn, $14.5 million each. I don't remember standing up. I remember the chair scraping the linoleum, the light buzzing, Walter watching me with the stillness of a man who has delivered this kind of news before and knows the room needs a moment before it can be lived in again. I sat back down. My father bought that land with $60,000, I said. He borrowed 40 of it against his truck, told me he had a feeling about the geology, said the land was ugly and nobody wanted it, and that was exactly the kind of land that turned out to be worth something once the world caught up to what it was sitting on. I put my head in my hands, not for the money hadn't become real to me yet. For my father, for Douglas Gallacher, dead at 39 on a frozen highway, who'd left behind 2 kids, a grieving wife, and a $60,000 bet on ugly land that had sat quietly in a filing cabinet for 29 years, becoming exactly the thing he always said it would. A thing that took longer than expected to become real. But before the lawyers, before the trust verification, before the call to Bryn, you need to know how I ended up scanning serial at 3 in the morning. The number in that folder means nothing without knowing what it was measured against. My name is Ryan Gallacher. 2 years earlier, I was a senior project manager at one of Calgary's largest oil and gas infrastructure firms, earning $195,000 a year, living in a 4-bedroom house in Tuscany, married to a woman named Sandra, raising 2 kids, operating on the reasonable assumption that the structure of my life was sound. It wasn't, but the failure wasn't structural, it was deliberate. I started in the industry at 23, an entry-level site coordinator for a mid-size pipeline contractor in Red Deer. Same steel-toed boots for 2 years, drove the site vehicle, kept the schedules, ran the subcontractors, learned the regulations better than people twice my age, because the fastest way to become irreplaceable is to know the thing nobody else bothered to learn. Project manager by 28, running multi-million-dollar contracts by 33. In 2014, at 34, Holt Energy Services recruited me, the largest privately held energy infrastructure firm in Alberta, run by a man named Preston Holt. Preston was 48, second-generation Calgary money, the kind of man who'd grown up watching his father build something and spent his adult life enjoying the result without fully grasping how it had been built. Charismatic, well-dressed, golfed with the people who mattered. Genuinely skilled at exactly one thing, spotting people who could do the work and standing close enough to them that the work looked, from a distance, like it originated with him. I worked at Holt Energy for 8 years, managed $340 million in infrastructure projects, built a team of 22, held the client relationships that kept the firm competitive, and I believed because I was too close to see it that Preston valued me for the work, not for what the work made him look like. I met Sandra at a charity auction in 2009 before Holt when I was still at the Red Deer firm. She was a marketing director for a real estate developer. We married in 2011. Our daughter Airdrie came in 2013, our son Cole in 2016. We bought the house in Tuscany. We had the life that looks from outside like the life people work toward. In 2021, Sandra started attending more industry functions. Calgary's oil and gas circuit is small and tightly wound, and Preston moved through it like he owned the floor. In many rooms, he effectively did. She started mentioning his name, Preston's new hangar at Springbank, Preston's box at the Saddledom. Preston said the Alberta Energy Regulator was about to shift its approval framework, and Ryan should position the firm accordingly. Preston said. I noticed. I said nothing. I didn't want to be the man who makes accusations out of anxiety instead of evidence. In October 2022, I found evidence. A hotel receipt from the Fairmont Palliser charged to a company card registered to Holt Energy, dated a Thursday in September when Sandra had told me she was at a client dinner in Edmonton. I confronted her in the kitchen after the kids were down. She didn't perform remorse. She sat with the steadiness of someone who'd prepared for the conversation and already decided where she stood. How long, I said. 14 months. Preston, my employer. Yes, she said my name the way you say the name of someone already filed under the past tense. I'm not going to apologize for knowing what I want. I want a divorce. The lawyer she'd retained 3 days later was the same firm Preston used for his corporate work. The Tuscany house had been mortgaged through one of Preston's banking connections, structured so Sandra held primary title. Our joint savings had been migrating into a personal account she'd quietly opened 6 months earlier. The vehicles were leased in a way that put them effectively out of reach in the settlement. When the papers finalized in December 2022, I had about $55,000, my personal belongings, and what I assumed would remain my professional reputation. The $55,000 lasted 9 months. Preston fired me in January 2023. He'd been building the paper trail since September, backdated performance concerns, a fabricated client complaint I later confirmed through the client himself had never been made. The termination letter cited conduct unbecoming, which is corporate for I have decided you need to disappear, and here is the reason I manufactured. I had grounds to fight it. But a wrongful termination case against a man with Preston's resources needs money I no longer had, lawyers willing to take it on, and emotional reserves I didn't have left after the divorce. Then came the freeze. Alberta's infrastructure sector isn't large. The senior ranks know each other and hiring runs mostly on referral. Preston made calls. I learned the shape of it from a former colleague, Jamie Fitzpatrick, over coffee at a Tim Hortons on McLeod Trail, his voice low like he was worried about the next booth. He's telling people you cooked the safety numbers on the Red Deer expansion, Jamie said, that you signed off on a structural report that wasn't compliant, not in writing, just to the people who matter. That's a lie. I know it's a lie, Ryan. I worked that expansion. But it doesn't matter what's true when the guy saying it controls $200 million in contracts and the people listening need his business more than they need to fact-check him. I applied everywhere: Calgary, Edmonton, Fort McMurray, Vancouver. The calls that came back were few and cold, and then they stopped. The money ran out in September 2023. I moved into a basement suite in Crossfield, 40 minutes north, $975 a month, and kept a border collie named Herschel because he was the one thing in my life not complicated by everything else in it. I drove for a delivery service for 3 months, did some landscaping. In November 2023, I walked into the overnight stocking operation at the Airdrie superstore and asked if they were hiring. Supervisor Tanya had the compressed energy of someone running a large team on limited resources and no patience for people who made that harder. You ever done grocery work? No. Car? Yes. Lift 50 pounds without making a thing of it? Yes. We start at 1725s, overnight Tuesday through Saturday 10 to 6, cereals and dry goods to start. I started that week. Every second weekend I drove to Preston's house in Elbow Park to collect Airdrie and coal, the kind of neighborhood where the houses run $3 million, the driveways are heated, and every tree-lined block announces that the people on it have arrived somewhere. I'd park my 2013 Hyundai Tucson at the curb, dent in the rear quarter panel I couldn't afford to fix, and walk up a path to a door that used to feel like mine and now felt like someone else's. Airdrie was 10 when the divorce finalized, 12 now, old enough to understand the shape of what changed, young enough that she shouldn't have had to do the arithmetic she was clearly doing every time she saw the Hyundai next to that house. Cole was 7, less observational and more operational. He wanted to know what we were doing, not what it all meant. He'd climb into the back seat and announce, "Can we go to the Dairy Queen on Deerfoot?" with the confidence of a boy whose only job was to keep moving forward. I said yes to the Dairy Queen every time. I said yes to most things I still could, because the list of things I couldn't had gotten long enough that I guarded the rest. Sandra texted me in January 2024. One sentence, the kind built specifically to make sure you know exactly where you stand in someone's revised accounting of you. The kids are embarrassed by that car, Ryan. I read it in the superstore parking lot at 6:15 a.m., blue vest still smelling of floor cleaner, drinking gas station coffee from a thermos. I read it twice, then I called Jamie. She texted me the kids are embarrassed by my car. He was quiet a moment. Is she right? Cole asked last week if the dent was getting fixed. Airdrie hasn't asked anything. Airdrie not asking is worse. I know. I drove home, walked Herschel along the river path north of town, watched him loop through the February cold, and tried to find the version of me who'd closed $340 million in infrastructure deals and run a team of 22 and believed, with reasonable cause, that he was building something. That was 16 months of my life. Tanya, the price gun, the overnight shift, the Dairy Queen, the texts from Sandra, the dent in the Hyundai, the border collie, the basement suite that smelled faintly of the last tenant's cigarettes no matter how many times I scrubbed it. Until a Tuesday night in March 2025 when a man named Walter Drummond walked into the superstore and asked for me by name. Now the verification, because $14.5 million needs more than an old man's folders at a break room table. It needs the kind of information you can build a life on. Walter gave me the number for the trust's solicitor, Frederick Oliphant, on 8th Avenue SW. I called the next morning. Oliphant was 67, unhurried, with the measured diction of a man who'd spent 40 years making complicated things comprehensible to people who needed them to be. The Gallacher Drummond Bernier Land Trust, he said. I've managed the file since 2003. I was aware your mother became beneficiary after your father's death, and that on her passing in 2019 the interest transferred to her estate. And you didn't contact me. A pause. We sent notification to the address on file, your mother's property in Leduc. By 2019 it had been sold. The letters came back. Our obligation under the trust was to preserve the assets, not to trace beneficiaries beyond the registered address. That falls outside a preservation trust's standard scope. I understand, but Mr. Oliphant, you're describing a $14.5 million oversight. Another pause, heavier this time. I want to say clearly that I wish the notification had reached you sooner. I'm sorry it didn't. How do I confirm ownership? Come to my office. 29 years of records, royalty statements, assessments, filings. 2 hours should give you complete confidence. I sat there 3.5 hours, the original registration, the parcel surveys, the 2007 development assessments, the 2014 extraction agreement, the royalty history, the current valuation of the undeveloped parcel, the trust's Scotiabank balance accumulating since the first payment. My father had been right about the land. He'd borrowed $40,000 against his truck to buy a third of 4,200 acres. Everyone else in 1991 thought was worthless, and he'd been right the way he was apparently always right about things that took longer than expected to become real. He just hadn't lived to see it. I sat in the parking lot afterward and called my sister Bryn in Saskatoon. I need to tell you something, sit down first. She was quiet for 40 seconds after I finished. I counted. Dad bought land, she said finally. Dad bought land. With Walter Drummond. And a man named Claude Bernie who died last year. And it's worth $87 million combined. Our half splits to about 14.5 each. She made a sound that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite laughing, the sound that only comes when news is too large and too specific and too tied to someone you lost to process as just a number. He borrowed against his truck, she said. I know. That brown Chevy, he drove it everywhere. I remember. Her voice dropped, smaller now. He was right. I know, Bryn, he was right. I hired Helen Tran, an estate and trust lawyer in Calgary. She reviewed everything and called 3 days later. Your ownership is clear, documented, and enforceable. You've been beneficial owner since your mother's death in 2019. Want to talk options? What are they? Liquidate. Walter's indicated he may want to buy your share, negotiate a buyout from trust assets, or hold your position and take part in the ongoing royalties and future development decisions. I want to talk to Walter first. We met at his office on Center Street, a small land consulting firm he'd built over 40 years, 2 employees, file cabinets floor to ceiling, and a photograph on the wall of 3 men standing in a field, squinting into the sun with the grin of people who've just done something they're not sure will work. Conklin, 1991, Walter said, following my gaze. Claude on the left, me in the middle, your father. He was 34 in the photo, checked shirt, work boots, arms crossed, squinting into the light, a man standing on something he believed in, before the world had confirmed he was right to. He found the parcels, Walter said. Claude and I trusted his instinct. He could read a geology report and a land survey and see what wasn't there yet but was going to be. That was his gift, seeing the thing before anyone else recognized it as a thing worth seeing. I looked at the photograph a long time. I'll stay in, I said. I want to understand what we have. I want a say in the remaining parcel. Walter smiled, not broadly, just enough. Good, your father would have made the same call. The royalty deposits started reaching my account in April. My first instinct was disbelief. I checked 3 times. It wasn't a mistake. I gave Tanya 2 weeks' notice. She looked at the letter, looked at me, figured something was going on. You scan cereal like someone who's done more than scan cereal. Turns out I also own land near Conklin. She nodded slowly, like this was a perfectly reasonable reason to quit a stocking job. Good for you. I think she meant it. In June, something happened I hadn't planned, but that felt, in hindsight, like the kind of thing the universe arranges when it's been keeping a long account. Walter and I, through the trust with Helen's guidance, bid on a parcel of industrial land in Rocky View County, northeast of Calgary. 3 competing bidders, according to the filings. One was Holt Energy Services. We won. It wasn't close. Jamie called that evening, walking somewhere, the way people do when they need to talk without an office around them. Preston's team's been digging into the winning bidder all day, pulled the trust filings, the beneficial ownership registry. A pause. His acquisitions director just walked into his office and set a printout on the desk. I'm told it had your name on it. And he sat there a long time, saying nothing. If you know Preston, that's the strangest thing he's ever done. I let it sit a moment. How is he? Ryan. I'm genuinely asking. Like a man who just realized he destroyed someone, and the someone turned out to be sitting on $87 million in land assets the whole time. Good, I thought. I didn't say it out loud. Some things are better felt than spoken. Sandra called the following week, the first time since the car text. Her voice had a quality it rarely had when we were married, careful, The way you approach something you're not sure is stable. Ryan, is it true, the land trust? It's true. Your father's company. Land trust, he formed it in 1991. How long have you known? Since March. Silence, the particular quiet of someone revising an internal calculation. How much, she said. I thought about Avery in the back seat doing arithmetic on a dent in a fender, about Cole asking for Dairy Queen with total trust that I'd say yes, about one sentence, no punctuation. The kids are embarrassed, Ryan. More than the Elbow Park house, I said. More than Preston's hangar at Springbank. Ryan, I'm not calling to. You texted me that our children were embarrassed by my car while I was working an overnight shift to pay rent on a basement suite. One sentence, Sandra, no punctuation at the end. I was being accurate, that a 12-year-old notices her father's circumstances. I know that. What you were doing was different, making sure I knew you'd notice too. She didn't answer right away. I'm picking up Avery and Cole Friday, I said. 6 o'clock, have them ready. I hung up. I rented a house in Cochrane that July, 3 bedrooms, a backyard backing onto the Bow River pathway, good schools, wide streets, the kind of quiet that sits 20 minutes west of the city where the Rockies start to suggest themselves on the horizon. Herschel had a yard for the first time in 2 years. He spent the first afternoon running the fence line, confirming its edges before he trusted them. Avery's room faces west. The first night she stayed over, she sat at her desk for 20 minutes just looking at the mountains. Cole's room got a Calgary Flames poster within the week. The custody modification went through Helen's referral to a family firm in Calgary, changed financial circumstances, stable housing, professional re-engagement, best interests of the children. The court reviewed it and awarded joint custody, equal time, alternating weeks starting in September. The first night both kids stayed in Cochrane, Cole walked through every room, came back to the kitchen and said, "Dad, this place is good." Yeah, I like that Herschel has a yard. He thought about it. Do you still work at the grocery store? No, not anymore. What do you do now? I manage a land trust. We own property in northern Alberta. Your grandfather bought it in 1991. Cole took this in with the directness of an 8-year-old uninterested in context he hadn't asked for. Does it make money? It does. Good. He opened the fridge. Can we get Swiss Chalet? Avery had been quiet, standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me. My father's habit, watch first, speak second, one I've only recently gotten old enough to recognize. Dad, she said, you seem different. Different how? You were sad for a long time, even when you tried not to be, I could tell. I looked at my daughter, 12 years old, who'd watched her father fall from a height she was too young to understand, land somewhere she was still making sense of, and quietly decided, over 2 years, what she thought of him for it. I'm not sad anymore, I said. She nodded once, slowly, like she'd been waiting to confirm it for herself. Can we also get Swiss Chalet? We got Swiss Chalet. Walter is selling the consulting business this year. 77, tired, and his wife wants winters in Victoria, which he's overdue to give her. We spent 6 hours last month going through the undeveloped parcel, the outstanding royalty agreements, the development options Claude had been tracking before he died. He walked me through it with the patience of a man who's held something in trust a long time and wants to hand it to someone who'll respect what it is. Your father would have loved this, he said at one point. He liked sessions where everything was laid out on the table and you could see the whole picture at once. Called it the view from above the work. I know what he meant. I used to run planning sessions the same way. You learned that from him. I didn't know I was learning anything. I was 13. Children learn things they don't know they're learning. Then one day they're 42, going through mineral rights assessments, and they realize they've been practicing a skill they didn't know they inherited. I've thought about that a lot since. The land my father bought in 1991 is still there, 4,200 acres northeast of Conklin. In the Cold Lake region, mineral rights he saw something in when no one else did. 2 parcels generating royalties. The third undeveloped, its assessed value climbing for 7 years straight. Walter thinks it's the most interesting of the 3, says my father thought so too, called it the patient one, the parcel that would take the longest and pay the most. I think he was probably right. I think about Sandra's text sometimes. The kids are embarrassed by that car, Ryan. I think about it the way you think about something built to diminish you that failed, not because it wasn't sharp, but because I turned out harder to shrink than she understood. She was wrong, not because my father's land turned out to be worth $87 million. She was wrong before that, wrong when I was scanning cereal at 3 a.m, wrong when I was driving the Hyundai with the dent, wrong when I sat in that Tim Hortons listening to Jamie tell me I'd been blacklisted. A man's worth isn't set by which car sits in front of which house, and it's certainly not set by someone who's already decided to price him and come up disappointed. What I know now is that the road through the overnight shift, the blue vest, the price gun, the basement suite in Crossfield, the texts engineered to remind me how small I'd gotten, that road led directly to a break room table where an old man opened a folder and showed me my father's handwriting on a document that had been quietly becoming real for 29 years. My father died at 39. I'm 42 now. For 29 years I didn't know what he'd left behind. The parcels, the trust, the partnership, the royalties accumulating under a name I'd never heard. I didn't know that while Preston Holt was calling around to blacklist me, my father's signature was sitting at the bottom of a land trust covering 4,200 acres in the same province. But I know now, and knowing has changed everything, not mainly because of the money, though the money has mattered in ways I won't pretend it hasn't, but because of my father. Because of Douglas Gallacher, who borrowed $40,000 against a brown Chevy to buy land nobody wanted, who believed in things that took longer than expected to become real, and who left behind a son who spent 29 years not knowing the most important thing he'd ever done. I've driven up to Conklin twice since, just to stand on the surface above the ground my father bought, let the wind come in off the muskeg and feel the size of what he saw there. I'm standing, in a sense, in the field he built, the trust, the parcels, the patient third piece, the view from above the work. He was the kind of man who bought the ugly land and waited. I'm his son. I'm still waiting on the patient parcel. Walter says 5 years, maybe 10, maybe sooner if the development agreements shift the way the surveys suggest. I'm not going anywhere. I asked Walter last month if my father had any sense of what the land might eventually be worth. He thought about it. I asked him that in 1991. He said he wasn't buying it for what it was worth. He was buying it for what it was going to be. A pause. He said, someday somebody's going to need what's underneath this ground, and I want to be the person who was patient enough to wait for them. He was right, Dad, about all of it. And the son you left behind, the one who didn't know what you'd done, who ended up in a blue vest at 3 a.m. with a price gun that kept jamming, he's still here, standing in the building you built, learning the view from above the work, holding the patient parcel until it becomes what you already knew it was. Because that's what you actually left him, not just the land, the stubbornness to wait.